Next on KQED Newsroom, demands for change at the San Francisco Police Department.
Healing has to start from the top.
Greg Suhr really has a challenge. He has to reform his organization.
The public's trust in us has been damaged. To be objective and fair and respond and do our job for all people. So we need to be about winning that back.
The challenge is to restoring public trust. Welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy. On tonight's show, we're going to examine the scandals that have shaken public trust in the San Francisco Police Department. In a moment, you'll hear from Chief Greg Suhr and District Attorney George Gascón. But we begin with a look at the problems that have surfaced over the past few months.
I was appalled, shocked, and astonished that in this day and age, something like this could happen in the San Francisco Police Department.
Sergeant Yulanda Williams is a 17-year veteran of the San Francisco Police Department. She's also president of Officers for Justice, which represents African-American policemen and women. Earlier this year, she learned her name was mentioned in a series of racist text messages exchanged between fellow officers.
I took it that it was not just a personal attack on me, but it was a personal attack on all women of color.
At first, police said 4 officers were under investigation. That number has now grown to 14.
I see this as a systemic issue, and I think it's only the tip of the iceberg. And I always felt within my heart when they said it was just 4, I said, if there's 4, there's more.
The public is starting to see what our clients have been telling us for many decades.
Matt Gonzalez is the chief attorney for the San Francisco Public Defender's Office.
There are police officers that unfortunately have very racist predispositions, and we have a culture within the department that will try to hide this information from the public because they fear that it will result in a change in their organization.
Gonzalez is also concerned about problems at the police department's crime lab. 2 employees are under investigation for mishandling DNA evidence.
I think the lab scandal is very unusual. I think any time that you have evidence that appears to point to somebody's innocence that isn't being fully investigated or presented to a jury, you shake your head.
The district attorney has set up task forces to investigate the problems at the lab and the texting scandal. Scientists and outsiders will assist in the lab investigation, but the text task force is made up of supervisors in the DA's office.
We would like to see outsiders, maybe members of the defense bar, former judges, people that don't owe their job allegiance to the district attorney.
The police department is recommending that 8 officers involved in the texting scandal be fired. But Sergeant Williams wants to see Police Chief Greg Suhr reach out to all officers and start an honest conversation about racism and homophobia in the ranks.
And healing has to start from the top to the bottom. And right now I feel like there's just a gaping wound.
So what is the department doing to address these issues? Scott Shafer asked Chief Greg Suhr.
Chief Suhr, welcome. Thanks for talking to us.
Sure.
I think it's fair to say this is a tough time for the San Francisco Police Department and police departments really across the country. And I want to begin by talking with you about the texting scandal. The Office of Internal Affairs knew about these texts in 2012, and you said you've been walled off from that investigation. Why didn't you know about them sooner?
The administration and the police department, unless you're on what was called the 6E list, were walled off from the knowledge of what was going on in the criminal investigation because the suggestion could have been made that it could have gone farther than just the officers involved.
But that protective order, according to the Chronicle, wasn't signed really until, I think, 2014, and it didn't specifically cover the texts.
Well, again, I'm not going to get into trying the motions that the defense is trying to make. That I think it's interesting that we're talking about the technicalities of statute of limitations, but none of these defense attorneys are saying that the officers didn't send the texts. So we'll have to let the lawyers do their thing. I know that certain lawyers try things in the media. So I am very confident that the wall that was put in place to preserve the integrity of the criminal case, wherever it was going to go, was there for a reason.
Would you have liked to know sooner?
I would like to have made sure that the officers that were engaged in criminal civil rights violations be convicted, which they were, and now is the time to take care of the admin.
You wouldn't have wanted to know sooner?
Not if it would have jeopardized the criminal case.
You know, the public defender, Jeff Adachian, obviously you're on the other side of most issues from him, but he says that this is really indicative of a culture of acceptance of racism, bias in the San Francisco Police Department. What do you say to that?
I say that I'm going to fire those officers responsible for those texts, but the process is that I recommend termination. It goes to the police commission, and I believe the police commission is supportive of my recommendation. We will not have that sort of conduct in the San Francisco Police Department. And again, Mr. Adachi can say what he wants. He knows me, he knows what I'll have, and I will not have this.
You've been on the force 33 years?
34.
34 years. Have you worked with any of these officers, Ian Firminger and the others, Captain Fox?
I have some, if not most, of the officers have worked for me, and I like to say that, you know, when we work, we're all working together. I don't know any of the officers well. I do know Ian Firminger fairly well from playing intramurals, but we weren't like, we never rode in a radio car together or did any work like that together.
But how surprised by these guys? Like when you saw it was Firminger and Fox, was it like, oh my God, I can't believe it? Or, yeah, that makes sense.
No, I mean, it's so beyond the pale. I don't, if I thought that this was predictable or somebody was capable of this, something would have been done beforehand.
But on the other hand, Captain Fox was in fact involved in 2004 in an ugly incident outside of a gay bar. The city settled that case. There was no discipline against him, in part because the commission or the department waited too long to act on it, the complaints. So isn't that a case, though, where perhaps the department covered up for somebody who many people thought might have been a bad cop?
Well, I mean, those questions are better posed for whoever was in my position of the administration back then. In 2006, I was at the PUC at Homeland Security.
Fair enough, but and it's not your responsibility, but you know, cops know each other, they talk about each other and to each other, they have barbecues and beers and their families get together. There was no sense that he was a problem?
Not insofar as since he's been under my administration.
Coming back to this question of bias, and we're hearing it across the country, where there's a concern about police departments and people of color. According to your department's statistics, some 47% of the arrests in San Francisco are African American versus 6% in the population. Traffic stops are about 3 to 1 versus whites. Based on those numbers, well, let me just say, what do those numbers tell you?
Well, I think you're leaving out a number of that very same report. So right around 48, 49%, about 44, 45% of the people that reported as a victim and or a witness calling 911 saying, hey, San Francisco Police Department, I want you to go talk to X, were sending us to go talk to an African American. We could go back and forth on statistics all day long. The point is that there's a situation right now where law enforcement across the country and here in San Francisco have the public's trust in us has been damaged to be objective and fair and respond and do our job for all people. So we need to be about winning that back.
If I'm a young African American or Latino or a family member, based on all of this, including the shooting recently of an unarmed, well, he had a knife, Guatemalan immigrant in the Mission, shot to death by an officer. What would you say to them to assure them that they're going to be treated fairly? Every
officer involved shooting is a tragedy. If I had anything to do over again, I'd love to unring the bell and not have any of my officers ever involved in anything like this, because I'm telling you, it's obviously hard on the person that's seriously injured or killed when we have to use deadly force, and all their families and friends. It's incredibly hard on the officers too and their family and friends.
If the officers had been wearing body cameras, there would be more objective evidence about this. And yet San Francisco police officers still do not have body cameras. Why?
So we're about to start a pilot probably in the next 30 days or so. We have a meeting later this week to finish up the policy and then get the cameras out. Why
does it take so long?
The bigger issue on having it on all officers isn't really the cameras as the cost, it's the data storage. For us, it'd be about $1.5 million plus a year. I mean, I believe that just like walkie-talkies and here in San Francisco, smartphones, we got them for all the officers a couple years ago. I believe that body cameras are going to be standard issue for every police officer in the country at some point in time. We got to get it figured out, but we will.
Police Chief Greg Suhr, thanks so much for talking to us.
Sure.
District Attorney George Gascón says it may take 2 years to review all the cases affected by the scandals. I spoke with Gascón, who was police chief before Greg Suhr, about the task the DA's office is now facing. District Attorney George Gascón, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
I'd like to start off by asking you about the bigoted texts. It's now up to 14 officers who are implicated in this case. What does that mean for you? How many cases do you think will have to be re-evaluated because of this?
Well, in our early review, it appears that we're looking at least 1,600 prosecutions, and we're looking at about 3,000 cases. There were about 3,000 cases that have been presented to our office, where these officers were the primary actor in the arrest, if you will. Out of those cases, about 1,400 were rejected, but there was an arrest, and we have an obligation to look at those. And then there were about 1,600 that we actually prosecuted.
Have you actually dropped any cases or had any dismissed yet?
We have already some cases that were pending. We have already had some cases that we have stopped the prosecution. But on the first level of review, there are probably about 60 people that are in custody today. Some of them are waiting trial. Some of them have been convicted that involve some of these officers. And if we have someone that was convicted, and now we have, based on our review, we form a new opinion that perhaps the case was tainted, obviously that has to be addressed. In addition to that, regardless of whether we think it's valid or not, we have to provide that information to the defense, and they get to do their own assessment. So that is just addressing the here and now, the people that are in custody that we know of. There may be others that we still don't know.
You have established a task force to investigate misconduct within the police department. Who is on that task force?
Right, so we have 3 task forces right now. We have one that is dealing with the text messages. We have one that is dealing with the problems in the DNA lab, and we have one that is dealing with the problems in the sheriff department. The one investigating the bigoted thefts are supervisors in this office, and they're members of this office that are doing that investigation.
Why can't you give the actual names, though? I think there's a concern among the public that if they don't know the exact people within your agency, it's sort of law enforcement investigating law enforcement, and there's an issue of trust and lack of confidence right now.
This is not simply law enforcement investigating law enforcement. Prosecutors are tasked with investigating official misconduct, corruption, police misconduct. It happens all the time. The fact that we're taking such an unusual step to assemble this task force, because I recognize that the scope of the problem was so large, is actually very unusual, and I think that people should understand that these are very unusual steps that are being taken precisely because we want to be very transparent.
Some of these problems actually started under your watch.
Actually, some of these problems started before my watch, right? If you look at all the people that are involved in this that were all hired before I got there, in 2010, when I found out about the drug problem in the lab, Debbie Madden had been apparently using drugs in the lab since 2004. Now, the mistake that I made in 2010, and it's one that I'm trying to avoid now, we did not bring a group of scientists to really look at it deeply. What we did is we brought other people that are used to evaluating labs, some of them in law enforcement, and obviously that was not enough.
I'd like to ask you about the culture of the police department. Do you think there is systemic bias within the department? And if you were Chief Suhr now, What would you do? How would you respond?
Well, I think that, look, any time that you have a case like the one involving at least appears about 14 officers, based on the information that the police department has made public, where very racist, bigoted messaging is going back and forth, and people feel very comfortable about speaking or trading information at that level, you have to ask yourself, could this be impacting other people?
Do you think how you handle this investigation will affect your chances at a re-election?
I don't believe so. I think that this investigation, while certainly has a tremendous impact on the criminal justice system in San Francisco and other places, by the way, this is not unique to San Francisco.
It's not unique, but the scope of it is certainly very unusual.
The scope is unusual, undoubtedly, but this is also an opportunity for us to really be thoughtful about the way that we do our work. And I think that most voters also would give me credit for the fact that I'm being so open and transparent about the work that we're doing. The reality is that what I'm doing, in many jurisdictions, you will never hear about it unless it was a whistleblower that put it out, unless some other way that information got out. Look, we found out about the text messages by the Chronicle, right? It's not like I got a call, somebody says, we have this problem. We found out about the problems with the DNA lab through the Chronicle. We found out about the problems with the Sheriff Department by a press conference that was given by the public defender because one of his clients told him. Those are problems that should have been brought out to the surface earlier, and we should not have found out through the media. So there are systems that need to be worked on to make sure that future generations of district attorneys don't have to go through what I'm going through today.
District Attorney George Gascón, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
And joining us now to discuss the problems at the police department are San Francisco Supervisor David Campos and Joyce Hicks, the head of the Office of Citizens Complaints. Thank you both for joining us. Joyce, I want to begin with you. Your office informed Chief Suhr about these inflammatory texts. How did the OCC find out about them?
Well, the OCC found out about the inflammatory text when we received a CD from the San Francisco Police Department's Internal Affairs Division to provide us with the information that they'd been provided by the U.S. Attorney's Office. And as we were going through the information on the CD, we discovered the racist text. And when we discovered them, we wrote the chief a letter outlining what was in that evidence.
So Internal Affairs informed you, but did not inform the chief. Does that concern you?
Internal Affairs provided us with the CD, which had masses of evidence on it, and to my knowledge, Internal Affairs Division had not discovered those texts when we discovered those texts. The Internal Affairs Division...
Does it bother you that they didn't notice these texts when they had all that data?
It does not concern me that they didn't notice the text, because we were going through that data in a systematic way to convert the data to something called OCR, and it's optical character recognition. And it just so happened that my technology staff began to see very racist and horrific words flying across the screen because we were trying to make this very unwieldy amount of information searchable. And so
so that's how
that is how we happened upon these messages.
Supervisor Campos, you were on the police commission from 2005 to 2008, and during that time, one of the officers implicated in the text scandal was accused in a different case. Jason Fox was accused of shoving a man's head against a urine-soaked wall and also using anti-gay slurs. Mm-hmm. Despite that, Fox rose through the ranks to become a captain. What are your thoughts on how that case was handled, and is it indicative of deeper long-term problems within the department?
You know, at the time, we had to deal with a settlement. There was a lawsuit that was filed against the city by this gentleman who was really mistreated and was subjected to a lot of homophobic and insulting remarks. And our thinking at the time, certainly my thinking, was I know we have to settle this claim, and I know that there are probably things that we're not able to do, but this is certainly an individual that I personally would not want to see in the force, and we need to keep an eye on him. So I'm surprised that and disappointed that after that, this is someone that actually rose through the ranks. And let me be very clear. We have a lot to be proud of in terms of our police department. There are many good officers, and in many respects, our department is better than it is in other parts of the country. But we clearly have a problem. We need to do something different because what's happened right now is that this police department has lost the trust of many communities. And I have a great deal of faith in Greg Suhr. I have a great deal of faith in Joyce Hicks, the director of OCC, but we need reform. We need to have a different approach to ensure that the public once again can have faith in this police department.
And so, Joyce, how do we go about restoring that faith? Do you think that the department needs more independent oversight? And I ask this because these texts, you found out about them in 2012, was that it?
No, that is not correct. We did not find out about those texts until late 2014.
Okay.
And that is when the U.S. Attorney's Office released that information to the administrative side of Internal Affairs Division and authorized the administrative side of Internal Affairs Division to release them to our office.
Okay,
so because there was a criminal investigation taking place, those of us oversight practitioners, including the Police Department's Internal Affairs Division, administrative side, and the Office of Citizen Complaints, we were walled off from that information. We were not aware of that information, and as soon as we at the OCC were able to compile the information and provide it to Chief Suhr, we did.
So is there better oversight needed so that you're not so walled off?
I think that it's a legal issue, and so it doesn't really have to do with oversight as much as it has to do with the criminal justice system and how when a criminal trial is taking place and a criminal investigation is taking place, that trumps everything. There are exceptions in the Public Safety Officer's Bill of Rights that provide for the statute to be told while a criminal investigation is taking place.
Well, I think that we need to move beyond the technicalities of what happened here. Obviously, we have to figure out how it is that it took so long to get the information. But beyond that, I think you have to look at the system. And one of the things that I think needs to happen is that there has to be a commitment to reform. And one of the things that is needed is we need to provide more resources to the OCC. I do believe, and I've said this since I've been on the Board of Supervisors, that they need more resources. That as capable as the director is, when you look at the size of their budget, $5 million to provide oversight to a department that has hundreds of millions of dollars in budget, I don't know that that's sufficient. I think that we need to do more to ensure that the resources needed are there.
Let me ask you, Supervisor Campos, about the officer-involved shooting involving Amilcar Lopez Perez in the Mission District. There are different accounts about what led up to it and whether Lopez Perez even understood what was happening and what the officers were trying to say to him. Are you concerned about the department's ability to handle officer-involved shootings fairly?
Well, I don't want to prejudge what happened, but I can tell you that there are many questions that have been raised by that community in this case, in terms of the language capability of the officers, the fact that it was an undercover officer, did the person actually understand what was going on? I think that we need to put everything on the table and figure out how we can address some of these concerns. And it's, by the way, not just oversight, I think that's important, but also training. One of the things that I think we need to do a better job of is making sure that we give our officers the tools they need to better interact with the community. So I think it's a very complicated issue, but it goes beyond just one specific thing.
Joyce, do you think Chief Suhr can reform the department? Are you confident in him?
I do have confidence in Chief Suhr, but I agree with Supervisor Campos that some significant changes need to take place with training. One of the areas of training that is of particular interest to me is the area of implicit bias and having a training with the department where the department incorporates the community, particularly those community members and those community groups who feel aggrieved by recent developments or by their relationship historically with the police department. President Obama's task force on 21st century policing has some very explicit recommendations on how police officers can deal with implicit bias and bias issues and issues around individuals who have mental illness or
Sure.
significant challenges.
I just want to say that, you know, I do have faith in Greg Suhr, but I don't think it's just about the police chief. I think it's about the police commission. I think it's about the OCC. It's about the board of supervisors. It's about the mayor's office. I think that City Hall...
Why hasn't the mayor been more vocal on this, by the way?
You're going to have to ask him, but I think that we need to have more action on the part of City Hall. You know, there was
what action can you take as a board of supervisors?
Well, I'll tell you, there was a resolution that Supervisor Avalos put forward that in a very mild manner simply said, we have issues in San Francisco, and that resolution was not approved at the Board of Supervisors. The Board of Supervisors, the mayor's office, need to recognize that we have a problem in our hands and we need to do something.
All right. Well, thank you both. We will leave it there. Thanks to Supervisor David Campos and Joyce Hicks, head of the Office of Citizens Complaints. And thank you for joining us. For all of KQED's news coverage, go to kqednews.org. I'm Thuy Vu. Have a good night.